What do you need to be mindful of before taking a job in consulting? What kind of people are consulting firms looking for? What do consultants even do? And is consulting really as good a career path as a lot of people say? I'm Mike. I've got 25 years in business. I've held C-level roles in multinational companies. I've been in consulting, I've been in tech, I've been in pharma. If you want to know more about how businesses actually work, you want to know more about careers, and specifically in today's video, you want to know more about working in consulting, then stick around. This is the video for you. Question number one, what are firms looking for in a hire? So there's a lot of different types of consulting, but usually you can boil them down to about 3 buckets. There's classic strategy consulting. Then there's tech consulting, which is a lot of things, but it's often system integrator work. And finally, there's basically everything else. That's finance transformation, that's HR transformation, supply chain, procurement, basically anything that a company might want help to get their business to run better at. Consultants basically claim to have knowledge about business problems that they can sell to customers at a premium, promising high-quality solutions at an accelerated pace. That's pretty much the value proposition. Each of these buckets are different and they have different demands, but typically they have some commonalities. In general, consultants work under time pressure and charge a lot of money. Usually this means they're looking for people who are hardworking. And by that, I mean people who are more hardworking than the average person. They also like to employ people that have a high level of conscientiousness. Consultants can't get away with half-assing a product, so every iteration that is put together is checked, double-checked, and reviewed to a very high standard all the time. I'll paint a mental picture for you. If you went to school and you were the kind of person that could get, the second best grade, an A or an A minus, with pretty much low effort, and you didn't see the point in putting in 200% extra to get the A plus, then your mindset isn't really consulting. Most consultants have this kind of, I need to do my best at every single thing kind of mindset. In personality theory, you'll usually see people coming out on a factor called conscientiousness. They are also looking for likable people, but not necessarily extroverts. It's a misconception that a lot of people have. Consultants don't have to be extroverted, but they do have to be able to and be willing to overcome their introversion and be able to make a good impression with new people all the time. Also, if you're the kind of person that isn't agreeable, so you speak your mind regardless of the situation, you're probably not going to do well in consulting. There's a social skill aspect to consulting that is important, and the Elon Musks of this world, who are known for their candor and their directness, typically don't do particularly well. Being able to communicate in a way that gets a message across without alienating a client is super important. Your grades, your extracurricular activities, the sports you do, they are all essentially just indicators of that conscientiousness, that likability, and the work ethic that they're looking for. Consulting firms also need people that are reasonably smart and very analytical. I usually say that consultants need to be smart enough to be in the room, but they don't need to be the smartest. Brains and the ability to quicker than most people figure out something complicated is a big help. And I'm sure there's a genius here or there in consulting, but for the most part, it's reasonably smart people that are really hardworking. But the ability to deconstruct a problem and analytically sort of approach a problem is going to be a key in all those areas. If you've made it this far, then you're likely enjoying the video. If so, then please subscribe if you feel the video warrants it. This channel is going to be your go-to for no-nonsense business and career insights, I promise. So what does a consultant do? Most videos will say that consulting is about solving complex business problems. And that's true, but it's not a statement that says anything, because what does that actually mean? Regardless of whether you are in tech, strategy, or in some sort of niche consulting, any entry-level role is about collecting data, crunching data, putting data together so it looks presentable, and preparing the data for somebody else to come up with recommendations based on that data. Now, here's an example. At the firm I was at the time, a client asked one of my colleagues to figure out if their distribution network for their product was optimal. Basically, this was a retailer of luxury goods that sold their stuff in their own stores, online, and through affiliate stores. The goal of the project was to figure out what was the optimal amount of stores. They had an idea that they probably had too many, so they wanted to figure out how many stores they should be and where they should be. That was the kind of thing they wanted to figure out, and that was the job that was given to the consultants. Now, the junior consultant, they were basically on Google Maps from day one. They mapped out locations, distance to other locations, distance to public transport, income level of locations, revenue numbers of all the stores. It was just data, 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 and data. And once they had all that data, they basically tried to build a model. And this was, back in the old days before AI. But basically, they made a model that recommended an optimal setup of stores for any given city across the globe. The job was data crunching and merging knowledges about city sizes, wealth in the city, store density, locations to public transport, and a ton of other data points, and turning that into a workable model. A literal ton of consulting work looks like this. It might not be market-based, but it's collect data, figure out what's important, and put together something that can be used as actionable advice. Now, if you're a tech consultant, you're often working as a system integrator, which means basically taking one big system and mashing it into another system that a company already has. At the entry level, a tech consultant is writing process documentation and workflow descriptions. Some might also be coding. Others might be on the side where the business workflow is being written down and mapped to a system workflow. If you're working in procurement consulting, you might be benchmarking a company's overall spend to other comparable companies. You'll be reviewing all the procurement deals and making assessments as to whether they have a major addressable spend, how they can get that spend down, which measures they could take to assert more control over strategic and operational procurement. Basically, again, reading a ton of documents, looking at data, looking at an org chart, and putting together something that communicates to the customer what they could do better. It's interesting typically because it's a project to figure out how a company can save $1 billion in costs, or to figure out how many stores they should have, or whether or not they should have a subscription model. But the core task boils down to crunching data, consolidating data, and presenting data, and at some point offering solutions based on that data. Consulting firms sometimes split their offerings into advisory and implementation, and it is just that. Advisory is literally just crunching the numbers and telling a business what they're good at and what they could be better at. Implementation is about actually supporting the changes that need to be made. Tier 1 firms like McKinsey, Boston, Bain, they historically have been mainly in the advisory space, where the big four, so Deloitte, Accenture, those kind of people, tech consulting, they have generally been focused on implementation. So basically rolling out SuccessFactors, rolling out Workday, rolling out Salesforce, or rolling out a finance shared service center, moving everything to Manila or India or wherever you want to move it. There's some nuances, but high level, this is what it historically has boiled down to. So why do firms buy consultants? Crunching data doesn't seem that hard, but it actually often is. Even in the biggest firms in the world, there aren't a lot of people in a company that have a consulting skill set. Consulting firms usually have a couple of advantages. First of all, they have other people's data. They have done this exercise before for other firms, so they have experience, and they also have comparative data that they can include in their bid. Secondly, they can work people harder. When you're paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars an hour for a consultant, you can work them to the bone in a way that most employees can't be worked. Some people don't want to, and some just don't have the ability. Working under intense pressure for extended periods of time is part of what consultants are paid for and are capable of. Third, it's methodology. Personally, I can spot an ex-consultant in a firm from a mile away. As a consultant, you learn things about how to structure your day, about how you put together a product or a proposal, and how well thought out that product needs to be from end to end to get it through an approval chain. Specialists that have not been consultants are often not typically good at project managing. They're not always that good at thinking outside of their niche. Consultants are really good at that. Things just tend to get done faster and better because they've learned to work in a very organized, systematic, and structured way. It's resources. Regardless of whether it's these analysis kind of projects or big implementations, they can throw people at the problem. A business usually has people stuck with actually doing their real jobs, and they don't have time to manage a huge IT implementation on the side. At some point, consultants get promoted. The higher up you get, the more your ability to build relationships and to sell matters. Being an engagement manager and a director and a partner are, I'd say, 90% about your ability to open doors and sell. Typically, very early in your career, the firms care about you getting good at those core consulting skills. So crunching numbers, consolidating, presenting, being structured, being organized. At some point, you'll be involved in proposal work. Proposal work and your ability to contribute to putting together a good pitch to a client will be crucial to your second, third, and fourth promotions. From proposal work, you start to move on to identifying leads and passing those up the chain, to selling extra stuff to existing clients, basically add-ons to existing projects. And finally, once you hit partner, usually what you're good at from a knowledge perspective takes a back seat to your business and client development skills. Being knowledgeable about what you do is important, but your job is to sell stuff that other people are going to deliver. Basically, in the beginning, most of your advancement is based on your ability to deliver on whatever tasks that are thrown at you. The higher up you go, the more you're going to be assessed on your ability to bring in clients. Consulting does continue to be a good career path, especially if you go to the Big Four or the top tier firms like Boston and McKinsey. You learn a lot in a short period of time, and most companies on the industry side are happy to poach you after 2-3 years. If you want to stay in consulting, it's great too. You just have to be comfortable with the commercial component of the work, which is going to be huge. On top of that, it's likely one of the careers where your job most likely is your life. A consulting job is not a 40-hour-a-week kind of thing. It's emails on Friday nights, it's proposals Saturday morning, and it's redoing those proposals on Sunday. Any consultant that says they have work-life balance might not be lying, but you definitely need to test them on their definition of what work and life balance is. Salary is going to depend. In general, if you calculate it on hours actually worked, the business case probably isn't that great, regardless of where you work. But in general, the top tier pays really, really well. I think you probably have to go to investment banking and corporate finance to get paid better straight out of college, but they are pretty much up there. Once you go below the top tier of firms, the salaries typically aren't that amazing. Big Four salaries can't necessarily always compete with the industry. It's going to depend on the firm. It's going to depend on the industry, and it's going to depend on the country you're in. But these companies don't make as much per client engagement on a per consultant level as McKinsey, so they don't pay as well. Because they're big also, they leverage your future employability as a value proposition, and that leads them often to pay more, I'm going to call it middle of the road types of salaries. So the big question is, what are the dangers of consulting? Consulting isn't for everybody, and depending on your personality and preferences, it can be challenging. For consultants at entry level, extroverts, my experience says, often have a hard time. And I know this sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I've seen it a ton of times. Some of the best partners, the ones that have huge networks and are hugely successful at the commercial side, had a tough time in their first years in consulting. And they did because they hated the number crunching. They hated sitting in front of that monitor all day. They felt they had learned what they needed to learn, and they wanted to talk to customers. For them, that core consulting skill learning period was hyper frustrating because it didn't play to their strengths. A lot of them ended up leaving early, and they probably ended up in a sales department somewhere. But the ones that stayed typically started performing better the higher up they got, because it was less focused on their sort of core skills and more about their relational skills. Now, on the opposite end, consultants with a very high work ethic and a very high attention to detail, the first years are usually spot on, but these are often the people that do get hit by burnout. I've seen this a ton of times. Your manager will never have a problem with you going the extra mile, and you definitely risk grinding yourself into the ground. Some people just get caught up in saying yes and yes and yes, and at some point, what is on their plate far outweighs what is healthy for them, and that's when burnout happens. Consulting, and this is a controversial one, does not care about you and will never design a job that accommodates your specific needs. You adjust to consulting and not the other way around. This also applies to your dreams of work-life balance, family, all that kind of stuff. The reason for this is simple. Consulting is at the beck and call of a customer. The very nature of consulting is to be there for the client. And if you want to leave at 3 on a Friday and spend time with the kids, consulting is just going to keep on moving on without you. Some people will feel consulting does get a little bit self-important sometimes. There's this quote that I've heard 1,000,000 times from partners at multiple firms. And it's a quote that comes up when people leave whatever firm they're at and go to a competitor. And the quote is, he's really going to make a difference over there. They're really going to benefit, and he'll be a strong addition. But yeah, he never would have made partner at our firm. Like I said, I've heard that quote so many times. And the quote encapsulates the self-perception of pretty much all consulting firms. We are amazing. No matter where you go, we raise the bar, but our firm is the best. It's not a huge issue, but consulting isn't particularly humble behind closed doors. I suppose all companies do have this sort of pride about them. And some people are going to bristle at that kind of what they feel is, a self-important mindset. Others will see it as a culture of excellence and a culture of high-performing individuals. Honestly, I think you probably know inside very quickly which view you're going to have on it. Typically, a lot of people leave consulting somewhere around the end of the second year to around the 5th year. There are all sorts of reasons for this. First of all, this is where industry firms fish you, because this is where your value to them is highest relative to your current salary. This is also where you're likely being exposed to the commercial aspect of consulting, and for a lot of people, that path isn't appealing. Third, by this time, you might be thinking about family, kids, or just not grinding in the same way you have, and this is just an opportune time to make a shift and try something different. After 5, 6-ish years, opportunities actually diminish in terms of job offerings. I've got relationships with some of the biggest global executive search firms, and generally there's a rule of thumb that if you've been in consulting for more than 5 years, transitioning to a management role in an industry often leads to failure. Just like experienced hires have a hard time in consulting, high-level consultants that switch too late often don't succeed either. I know more than one senior-level consultant or partners that I would not touch with a 10-foot pole if they were to be hired into an industry role with management responsibility of a large function. They just haven't learned the skills needed. Leadership, the ability to run day-to-day operations, getting into the minutiae of doing regular work. It's not impossible, but often it's a path to failure. Consulting is a good career path, there's no doubt about it. It's intense, it's demanding, you don't have to be an extrovert. You do have to at least be able to pretend that talking about how much you love working hard and being busy is something you enjoy. A majority of people that get into consulting look back on their consulting years with fondness. It's almost an extension of your college or university years. Work hard, play hard is very much a thing at these firms. The most critical of you will feel that consulting is a bit superficial, a bit materialistic, and from a content perspective, only a couple of scratches deep. Deep specialists or people who want to be deep specialists often find it not specific or deep enough, but of course there are exceptions. For a lot of entry-level people, it's a great start to kick off your career, and in some ways the vibe is a lot like the one you had in college. That's about it. Consulting is a good option that will appeal to those high achiever types. There was the old McKinsey partner story from the 80s that says, we hire insecure overachievers, and I do think to this day, that still to a large extent holds true. So go crunch some data and make some PowerPoints. I mean, if you think that sounds like fun. Thanks for watching. I'll be back in 2 weeks where I'll be sharing my thoughts on why it's so difficult in big corporate companies to get a raise and also what you can do to influence that raise. I hope you'll be back in 2 weeks as well. If you have any questions, any comments, put them in the comments below. I will be sure to answer as many as possible, and also subscribe if you enjoyed the content. See you soon.